Renee Walker didn't expect the house on Wexford Drive to stay with her the way it did. At first, it was just another address scribbled on a worksheet, another quiet suburban stop between a dentist's office and a townhome owned by a retired couple who argued about dust like it was a moral failure. Wexford Drive sat farther out than most of her jobs, tucked behind tall hedges and an iron gate that slid open only after she pressed a buzzer and waited. Long enough to wonder if she'd come on the wrong day. Long enough to feel small. The house revealed itself slowly. Gray stone, wide windows, a roof that looked heavier than necessary. It didn't shout wealth. It assumed it. Renee parked near the circular drive and sat for a moment before getting out. She always did that at new places. Took one breath. Then another. A habit she'd picked up after the divorce, after realizing how quickly a normal day could tilt sideways. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and something older. Paper maybe. Or time. The floors gleamed in that careful way that meant someone paid for regular maintenance but rarely walked barefoot. Eleanor Whitcomb met her in the foyer. Tall, composed, her gray hair pinned neatly back as if nothing in her life ever surprised her anymore. "You're Renee," Eleanor said, already turning away. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor handed her a typed list. Rooms. Instructions. Everything precise. Everything controlled. "You'll start upstairs," Eleanor said. "Bathrooms, bedrooms, then the main level if you have time. The basement is off limits." She said it casually, like mentioning a closet with a broken hinge. But her eyes flicked to Renee's face, sharp and assessing, as if measuring how much explanation would be needed. "That's fine," Renee said. It always was. The upstairs bedrooms were immaculate. Too immaculate. Beds made tight enough to bounce a coin. Closets organized by color and sleeve length. It felt less like a home and more like a hotel suite that never quite got checked out of. In the hallway, Renee noticed framed photographs. Dozens of them. Fundraisers. Ribbon cuttings. Men in suits smiling beside officials whose faces she half recognized from the news. One man appeared again and again. Tall. Dark-haired. His smile stiff like it was rehearsed. Renee paused, squinting at one photo. The man stood beside Eleanor, his arm around her shoulders. Neither looked happy. She assumed he was her husband. Late husband, probably. The house had that feeling. Downstairs the kitchen gleamed. Stainless steel. Stone counters cold under Renee's palms. She wiped, scrubbed, moved on autopilot. Until she reached the door near the pantry. It blended in with the wall. Same paint. Same trim. But the hardware was wrong. A keypad. A deadbolt. And above it, a thick metal latch that belonged on a warehouse, not a suburban home. Renee frowned. She leaned closer, noticing faint smudges on the keypad. Recently used. Probably a wine cellar, she told herself. Rich people loved wine cellars. She worked around it. Cleaned the counter. The floor. The baseboards. Every few minutes, her eyes drifted back to the door. She didn't hear anything that first day. Or maybe she did and convinced herself she hadn't. When she left, Eleanor was already gone. The house locked itself behind Renee with a soft, final click. On the drive home, Renee shook off the unease. Every wealthy house had its quirks. Panic rooms. Gun safes. Locked rooms no one talked about. At home, her son Jordan sat on the couch doing homework, headphones crooked around his neck. "How was work?" he asked. "Fine," Renee said. She kicked off her shoes and started dinner. Chicken. Rice. Normal things. That night, as she lay in bed, the image of the basement door returned uninvited. The keypad. The latch. The way Eleanor's eyes had lingered just a second too long. The next week, Renee went back. Same routine. Same quiet. Same door. This time, as she cleaned the kitchen sink, she heard it. A sound. Oh, oh. At first, she thought it was the pipes. Old houses groaned and knocked. But this was different. It came in short bursts. Almost like someone tapping. Then stopping. Then tapping again. Renee turned off the water. Held her breath. The sound stopped. Her heart thudded loud enough that she wondered if someone else could hear it. She finished quickly that day and left early, telling herself she was imagining things. But as she drove away, One thought refused to loosen its grip. That door didn't just keep things out. It kept something in. And if you're listening to this and you're the kind of person who notices small details, the kind most people overlook, you might want to stay with this story. There's more behind that door than anyone was prepared for. The following week, Renee returned to Wexford Drive. And this time the house spoke back. The second time Renee walked into the house on Wexford Drive, Eleanor Whitcomb was waiting. Not in the foyer this time. In the kitchen. She stood near the island with a porcelain mug cupped in both hands, as if she'd been there a while. The blinds were half open, letting in thin lines of winter light that cut across the counters. Everything looked exactly the same as the week before. Clean. Ordered. Untouched. "You're early," Eleanor said without looking at the clock. "I had fewer stops today," Renee replied. Eleanor nodded once as if that explained something important. "Consistency matters," she said. "I like to know when people are here." Renee caught the subtle emphasis on people. Plural. Her shoulders tightened. Eleanor set the mug down carefully. Not a clink. Not a sound out of place. Then she handed Renee another printed list. Similar to the first. Almost identical. Except one line had been added at the bottom. Basement, do not enter. Do not touch the door. Eleanor followed Renee's eyes to it. "I forgot to include that last time," she said calmly. "It's not part of your duties." "That's fine," Renee said again. She meant it. Mostly. Eleanor studied her for a moment longer than necessary. Then she smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "You'll find I'm very easy to work for," she said. "As long as expectations are respected." Renee went upstairs. The bedrooms felt colder than before. Or maybe she was imagining it. As she vacuumed, she noticed the photos again. The man from before. Daniel Whitcomb, she would later learn. At this point, he was just a face. A presence. In one photo, he stood alone, accepting an award. His jaw was set tight, his eyes narrowed as if he didn't trust the applause. Renee wondered what kind of man posed like that. Downstairs, Eleanor sat in the living room reading, glasses perched low on her nose. She didn't look up as Renee moved through the space, but Renee could feel her awareness. Like a spotlight just offstage. When Renee reached the kitchen, the basement door was impossible to ignore. It was directly in her line of sight now. The keypad's numbers were worn. Used. Not just once in a while. Renee wiped the counter slowly. The sponge squeaked faintly against the stone. Then she heard it again. Tap, tap. Her hand froze mid-motion. Eleanor turned a page in her book. Tap, tap, tap. Renee's breath went shallow. She glanced toward Eleanor, but the older woman didn't react. Didn't flinch. Didn't even pause. Maybe she didn't hear it. Or maybe she did. The tapping stopped. Renee finished the kitchen in silence, every sense tuned too high. When she passed the basement door, she noticed the faint scratches near the handle. Thin lines. Fresh. She didn't touch them. As she packed up her supplies, Eleanor stood and walked her to the door. Too close. Too controlled. "You do good work," Eleanor said. "I appreciate discretion." Renee nodded. "Of course." At the gate, Eleanor stopped. "If you ever have questions," she added, "you should ask me directly. Not neighbors. Not anyone else." "I don't usually talk much," Renee said. Eleanor smiled again. This time it lingered. Good. That night, Renee dreamed of knocking. Of a door that knocked back. The third visit came with snow. Light, powdery flakes that softened the world and made everything quieter than it should be. Renee buzzed in and waited longer this time before the gate opened. Inside, the house felt different. The air heavier. Like it had been holding something all week. Eleanor wasn't home. Renee moved through the upstairs quickly. Too quickly. Her eyes kept drifting to the staircase. To the kitchen. To the door. She told herself she wouldn't listen for it. But as she wiped the kitchen sink, there it was. A voice. "Hello." It was barely louder than a whisper. Strained. Careful. Renee dropped the sponge. Her heart hammered so hard it made her dizzy. She stood perfectly still, afraid that even breathing might make it stop. "Please," the voice said. "Is someone there?" Renee stared at the basement door. Her legs felt rooted to the floor. Every rule Eleanor had set echoed in her head. Every warning. But the voice didn't sound dangerous. It sounded tired. Renee took one step closer to the door. Then another. Her hand hovered inches from the wood as the voice spoke again, softer this time. I don't know how much longer I can do this. Renee swallowed. And for the first time since taking the job, she realized this house wasn't just hiding secrets. It was hiding a person. Renee didn't touch the door. She kept her hand suspended in the air for a long second, fingers trembling before pulling it back like the wood might burn her. Her heart was beating too fast, loud in her ears, and she was suddenly very aware of how alone she was in that house. Hello? The voice came again, weaker this time. Please, don't leave. Renee backed up until her calves hit the edge of the kitchen island. She pressed her palms against the cold stone to steady herself. Who are you? She asked. Her voice sounded thin, like it didn't quite belong to her. There was a pause. A long one. Long enough that she wondered if she'd imagined everything. Then the man spoke again. My name is Daniel Whitcomb. The room seemed to tilt. Renee let out a short, breathless laugh before she could stop herself. That's not funny, she said. Whoever you are. I'm not joking, the man replied. I know how it sounds. Renee's mind raced. She'd seen that name. Everywhere. On the plaques. On the magazines stacked neatly in the study. On the framed articles about philanthropy and business growth. Daniel Whitcomb was supposed to be dead. Or retired. Or gone in some polite, vague way rich people disappeared when things got inconvenient. You're Eleanor's husband, Renee said slowly. Yes. And you're supposed to be, she stopped herself. Dead felt too final to say out loud. They told people I was ill, Daniel said. Then that I needed privacy. Then that I passed quietly. Renee's throat went dry. How long have you been down there? Another pause. This one heavier. 14 months, he said. Her knees nearly buckled. She slid into one of the kitchen chairs without meaning to. That's not possible, she whispered. Someone would have noticed. They did, Daniel said. They were told not to. Renee shook her head. This was insane. A trick. A nightmare brought on by too many long days and not enough sleep. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you're here, Daniel said. And because you listen. Something in his voice cracked on the last word. Not enough to be dramatic. Just enough to be human. Renee stood up abruptly. I can't do this, she said. I shouldn't even be talking to you. I know, Daniel replied quickly. I don't expect anything. I just needed to know someone was still up there. The simplicity of that landed harder than any plea. Renee grabbed her bag and moved toward the door. Her hands were shaking so badly she fumbled with the zipper. Please, Daniel said again. Softer now. Just tell me, what day is it? Renee froze. She glanced at the calendar hanging by the fridge. A smiling beach scene. Completely wrong for the moment. It's Tuesday, she said. January 9th. There was a sharp inhale from the other side of the door. Then silence. Renee waited. Counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. Thank you, Daniel said finally. I won't forget that. Renee left the house without finishing the job. Outside, the cold air hit her face like a slap. She stood by her car for a long time, keys clenched in her fist, staring back at the house as if it might follow her. The drive home passed in a blur. Traffic lights. Familiar streets. All of it felt unreal, like she was watching someone else's life through a window. At home, Jordan was in the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge. You're home early, he said. Yeah, Renee replied, forcing a smile. They didn't need as much today. She burned dinner that night. Forgot to set a timer. Stared at the stove without seeing it. After Jordan went to bed, Renee opened her laptop. She typed Daniel Whitcomb's name into the search bar. The results filled the screen instantly. Articles, interviews, photos, headlines talking about legacy and influence. About a man who built an empire and then quietly stepped away. One article mentioned his passing in vague terms. No funeral details. No cause listed. Just a paragraph that felt thin. Renee scrolled. She found older pieces too, buried deeper. Lawsuits settled out of court. Environmental violations overseas. A housing project that collapsed under investigation. Nothing definitive. Nothing that stuck. This wasn't a saint. But it wasn't a man who deserved to vanish into a basement either. Renee closed the laptop and sat back, rubbing her temples. She told herself she wouldn't go back. That she'd ask to be reassigned. That she'd pretend she never heard anything. But as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept returning, steady and unrelenting. If she didn't go back, no one else would hear him. And somewhere beneath that quiet, perfect house on Wexford Drive, a man was counting days that no one else remembered. The question wasn't whether Renee could forget that. It was whether she could live with it. Renee went back the following Tuesday, even though she told herself she wouldn't. She stood in her kitchen that morning with her coat on, keys in hand, staring at the front door like it might stop her if she waited long enough. Jordan was still asleep. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's car starting. She thought about calling the cleaning service and asking for a different assignment. She thought about making up an excuse. Migraine. Car trouble. Anything. Instead, she locked the door behind her and drove to Wexford Drive. The gate opened slower than usual. Or maybe her nerves just stretched time. Snow from the night before clung to the hedges, muffling sound. The house looked exactly the same. Solid. Untouched. Like nothing beneath it could possibly be wrong. Eleanor wasn't home. Renee checked the schedule posted near the mudroom. Bridge club. Same as before. A predictable rhythm. That should have comforted her. It didn't. She set her supplies down carefully, listening. The house was quiet. No tapping. No voices. Just the low, steady hum of heating vents. Upstairs first. Always upstairs. As she cleaned, Renee noticed details she'd missed before. A dent in the hallway wall that had been painted over but not fully sanded. A cracked frame turned carefully away from view. Small imperfections hidden under layers of polish. In one bedroom, she paused at a nightstand. The drawer was slightly open. Inside, she saw a stack of old phones. At least 4. Different models. All powered off. Renee didn't touch them. She closed the drawer gently and moved on. Downstairs, the kitchen felt colder than the rest of the house. The stone counters chilled her palms even through her gloves. She wiped slowly, deliberately, listening to every sound. Nothing. She told herself that was good. The basement door waited at the edge of her vision. Renee worked around it. She cleaned the stove, the sink, the backsplash. She left the floor near the door for last, as if saving it would give her more time to decide something she didn't want to name. When she finally knelt down, she noticed something new. The scratches were deeper. Not just near the handle this time, but lower. Longer. Like someone had dragged something heavy across the surface. Or tried to wedge their fingers into the seam. Renee's stomach turned. She leaned closer, her breath fogging the paint. "Daniel?" she whispered. There was a pause. Then faintly, "I'm here." Her shoulders sagged with a relief she hadn't realized she was carrying. "How are you?" she asked before she could stop herself. A soft, humorless exhale came through the door. "Still breathing," he said. "Which seems to matter to you." Renee huffed a quiet laugh, surprising herself. "It does," she said. Then more firmly, "You can't make that noise." The scratching. Someone could hear. "I know," Daniel replied. "I'm sorry. I was trying to measure the door." "Measure it for what?" "So I don't forget how big it is," he said. That answer sat between them, heavy and strange. Renee shifted her weight, glancing at the clock. She shouldn't be doing this. Every instinct screamed at her to leave. But she stayed. "Why haven't you tried to escape?" she asked. "I did," Daniel said. "Early on. And then I learned what happens when I make things difficult." Renee didn't ask him to explain. She didn't need to. Silence filled the kitchen. Not awkward. Just full. Finally, Renee stood and walked to her bag. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. She pulled out a granola bar. Then another. A bottle of water. I can't stay long, she said, kneeling again. And I can't do this every time. I understand, Daniel replied immediately. Too quickly. Like he'd practiced the response. Renee slid the items under the narrow gap beneath the door. Her hand brushed the cold concrete on the other side. There was a rustle. Then a shaky breath. Thank you, Daniel said. Not loud. Not emotional. Just real. Renee stood abruptly. Don't ask me for anything else, she said. Please. I won't, he said. And after a moment, but I'm glad it was you. Renee grabbed her bag and finished the rest of the house in a blur. When she stepped outside, her legs felt weak, like she'd just run too far. In her car, she sat with the engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. She'd crossed a line. There was no pretending otherwise. Helping him didn't feel heroic. It felt dangerous, complicated, wrong in ways she couldn't fully explain. As she drove away, one thought pressed harder than the rest. That door hadn't just been reinforced to keep Daniel in. It had been reinforced to make sure anyone who heard him would think twice about opening it. And now she had. Whether she wanted to admit it or not. The sound followed Renee home. Not literally. There was no tapping in her walls, no voice drifting up through her floors. But the rhythm of it stayed with her. That dull, patient knocking. The kind that didn't demand attention, just waited for it. She noticed it while cooking dinner, the knife thudding too loudly against the cutting board. While helping Jordan with math homework, her pencil tapping in uneven beats. Even later, lying in bed, the sound of her own heartbeat felt like it was echoing off concrete. She slept badly. When morning came, Renee woke with a headache and a thin layer of dread sitting just beneath her ribs. She told herself she'd done the right thing. Or at least a human thing. Food and water weren't crimes. She hadn't opened the door. She hadn't promised anything. Still, the image of the scratches wouldn't leave her. They weren't the marks of a man panicking. They were deliberate. Measured. Like someone trying to stay sane by staying busy. At work that week, Renee moved through her other jobs on autopilot. A townhouse where a couple argued loudly about whose turn it was to clean the fridge. A law office that smelled like burnt coffee and copier ink. Normal places. Normal problems. And yet, everything felt staged. Like she was watching a set built to look like real life. On Thursday afternoon, she overheard two women talking outside a grocery store. One of them mentioned the Whitcomb name casually, the way people did when they assumed everyone else knew the story. Sad how he went, the woman said. So much money still didn't save him. Renee's chest tightened. She kept walking, head down, heart pounding. The world believed a version of events that fit neatly into conversation. That fit into headlines. The truth didn't. By the time Tuesday came around again, Renee had decided she would keep her distance. She'd clean the house quickly. She wouldn't listen. She wouldn't engage. She buzzed in at the gate and waited. Nothing. She buzzed again. Longer this time. Finally, the gate slid open with a reluctant groan. Inside, the house felt wrong the moment she stepped in. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just off. The air was stale, heavier than before, as if the windows hadn't been opened in days. Eleanor's car wasn't in the driveway. Renee set down her supplies slowly. She didn't call out. She didn't move right away. She stood there listening. At first there was nothing. Then faintly a cough. It came from below. Renee closed her eyes. Just for a second. Upstairs she worked faster than usual. Dusting. Vacuuming. Avoiding the photographs. Her hands moved efficiently, but her mind stayed locked on the kitchen below. When she finally descended the stairs, the sound was clearer. A dry, strained cough. Followed by uneven breathing. Renee set her bag down harder than she meant to. "Daniel?" she whispered. No answer. Her pulse jumped. She dropped to her knees beside the door. "Daniel?" she said again, louder now. "Can you hear me?" A long pause stretched out. Long enough that her thoughts went dark. Then faintly, "I'm here." Relief washed over her so fast it made her dizzy. "You don't sound okay," Renee said. "I'm not," Daniel replied. "I think I have a fever." Renee glanced at the clock. At the door. At the list Eleanor had given her. She swallowed. "Have you told anyone?" A short, humorless sound escaped him. I don't think I'm allowed to be sick. That landed harder than she expected. Renee pressed her forehead briefly against the door. The wood was cool, solid, unforgiving. I can't bring medicine, she said. I don't have. I know, Daniel interrupted gently. I'm not asking. Another pause. I just didn't want to be alone with it. Renee exhaled slowly. She rummaged through her bag and found a bottle of water half full. She slid it under the door, followed by the last granola bar she'd packed for herself. You need to drink, she said. Slowly. I will, Daniel replied. His voice sounded weaker today, less controlled. Renee sat back on her heels, her knees aching against the tile. Why don't they check on you? She asked before she could stop herself. Daniel didn't answer right away. They do, he said finally. Just not the way you're thinking. Renee's stomach tightened. What does that mean? Footsteps sounded above them. Not hers. Heavy. Measured. Coming from the hallway. Renee froze, every muscle locking in place. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. You should go. The footsteps stopped just outside the kitchen, and someone's hand touched the basement door handle. Renee didn't breathe. Her eyes locked on the basement door handle as it turned slowly, deliberately, like whoever held it wanted to be heard. The metal gave a faint click, then stopped. The deadbolt held. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Eleanor's voice came from the other side of the kitchen. Come. Pleasant. Almost bored. You can stand up, Renee. Renee did as she was told. Her knees protested as she rose, blood rushing back into her legs too fast. She turned slowly. Eleanor stood near the kitchen island, her coat still on, gloves tucked neatly into one pocket. Snow clung to the hem of her slacks. She looked like she'd just come in from a walk, not like someone who'd almost caught another human being kneeling at a locked basement door. I didn't hear you come in, Renee said. It was the first thing that came to mind. Stupid. Small. I know, Eleanor replied. I'm very quiet when I want to be. Her gaze drifted from Renee's face to the floor near the door, to the faint line where the granola bar wrapper had been pushed out of sight with Renee's foot, to the water bottle cap still rolling slightly before it settled. Eleanor sighed. Not angrily. Almost disappointed. I was hoping you were smarter than this, she said. Renee's heart hammered. I don't know what you think you saw. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. I think you heard something you shouldn't have. And instead of walking away, you listened. From behind the door, Daniel didn't make a sound. Renee took a step back, instinctively putting space between herself and the basement. Someone was sick, she said. Anyone would have helped. Eleanor's lips curved faintly. Anyone who didn't understand the situation. And what situation is that? Renee asked, her voice shaking despite her effort to steady it. Eleanor walked closer. Each step was unhurried, controlled. That some problems are better contained, she said. Out of sight, out of conversation. Renee felt anger flare sharp and sudden. You're talking about a person. Eleanor stopped a few feet away. I'm talking about my son. The word landed heavy. Wrong. Renee blinked. You're a son? Yes, Eleanor said. Daniel is my son. Not my husband. The ground seemed to tilt beneath Renee's feet. But the photos, Renee started, were curated, Eleanor finished. Like everything else. Renee's mouth opened, then closed. The revelation scrambled everything she thought she understood. The age gap. The way Eleanor looked at the man in the photos. Not with affection. With ownership. Behind the door, Daniel spoke for the first time since Eleanor entered. Don't, he said quietly. Eleanor didn't turn around. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore. Renee felt trapped between them. Why is he down there? She demanded. Why not a hospital? Or, because hospitals involve paperwork, Eleanor said. And questions. And people who don't know when to mind their business. That's kidnapping, Renee shot back. Eleanor smiled thinly. It's family. Silence swallowed the kitchen. Renee realized then that Eleanor wasn't panicking. She wasn't worried about being exposed. She was deciding something. You seem like a decent woman, Eleanor said after a moment. Hardworking. Quiet. I value that. Renee swallowed. Then let him go. Eleanor shook her head. That's not how this ends. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You have a son, don't you? Jordan. Renee's blood ran cold. How do you? I like to know who I let into my home, Eleanor said, and who might become a liability. Daniel's voice sharpened. Leave her out of this. Eleanor finally turned toward the door. You lost the right to make requests. Renee's chest tightened. The fear was no longer abstract. It had a name. A face. Her child's. I won't tell anyone, Renee said quickly. I swear. I'll quit. I'll disappear. Eleanor studied her for a long moment. I believe you, she said. Mostly. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. She placed it on the counter between them. There's cash inside, Eleanor said. Enough to make this your last day. Renee didn't move. Eleanor's gaze hardened. But understand this. If I ever suspect you've spoken to anyone about what happens in this house, I won't come after you. She let that hang. I'll come after your silence. Eleanor turned and walked out of the kitchen, her footsteps retreating down the hall. A moment later, the front door opened, then closed. The house fell silent again. Renee stood there, shaking. From behind the door, Daniel spoke softly. I'm sorry. Renee stared at the envelope on the counter, and realized the worst part wasn't the threat. It was that Eleanor fully expected her to take the money. Renee didn't touch the envelope right away. It sat on the counter like something radioactive. Too ordinary. Too clean. A pale rectangle that pretended to be a solution. Her fingers curled against her palm to keep from reaching for it. She could already guess what was inside. Crisp bills. Enough to feel heavy in her bag. Enough to make silence tempting. From behind the basement door, Daniel shifted. The sound was subtle. Fabric against concrete. A reminder that he was still there. Still listening. She does this, he said quietly. She makes things feel reasonable. Renee finally looked at the door. She threatened my son. I know, Daniel replied. That's how she keeps people still. Renee's throat tightened. How long has she been like this? There was a pause. Not hesitation. Memory. Longer than I wanted to admit, Daniel said. She learned early that fear works better than love. And lasts longer. Renee leaned back against the counter, her legs suddenly weak. You said she was your mother? She said. Why did everyone think you were her husband? Daniel let out a dry breath. Because it suited her. Because it blurred lines. And because correcting it would have raised questions. What kind of questions? Renee asked. The kind that lead to doors opening, Daniel said. Renee closed her eyes briefly. She thought of the photos upstairs. The way Eleanor's hand always rested just slightly too firm on Daniel's arm. Not affectionate. Possessive. You could have exposed her, Renee said. You had money. Power. Daniel laughed softly. There was no humor in it. I had the illusion of both. Most of it was built on what she helped me hide. That made Renee open her eyes. What do you mean? She asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. Careful. My company wasn't clean, he said. I knew that. I told myself it was temporary. That I'd fix it once I had enough leverage. Renee waited. I never fixed it, Daniel continued. People got hurt. Communities. Families. I signed papers that ruined lives without ever seeing their faces. The words settled slowly, heavily. So this is punishment, Renee said. No, Daniel replied. This is containment. Renee looked back at the envelope. Suddenly it didn't feel like hush money. It felt like proof. Proof that Eleanor believed this situation was still under control. You tried to stop something, Renee said, remembering his earlier words. Yes, Daniel said. Too late. And not cleanly. He explained in pieces. Never all at once. How regulators had started asking questions. How he'd considered cooperating. How his mother found out before anyone else did. She told me I was tired, Daniel said. That I needed rest. Perspective. Renee's stomach twisted. And you believed her. I wanted to, he admitted. Renee imagined what it must feel like to realize the person who raised you knew exactly how to dismantle you. What happens now? Renee asked. Daniel was quiet for a long time. I don't know, he said finally. But I know what she wants. And that is for you to walk away, he said. And for me to disappear without noise. Renee stared at the floor. At the faint scuff marks near the door. At the line where the tile met the wood. I can't do that, she said. Daniel's breath caught. Renee. I can't take the money, she continued. And I can't pretend I didn't hear you. Silence pressed in on both sides of the door. Then you're in danger, Daniel said softly. Renee thought of Jordan's room. His shoes by the door. The way he still leaned into her without thinking when he laughed. I already am, she said. She picked up the envelope. For a second, Daniel didn't speak. Renee could almost feel his fear rising. Then she tore it in half. What? Then again. Until the bills slid out onto the counter in a loose, accusing pile. I don't want this, Renee said. And I don't want her deciding what kind of person I am. Daniel exhaled slowly. You shouldn't have to carry this. I know, Renee replied. But here we are. She gathered her things quickly. Too quickly. Panic was starting to nibble at the edges of her resolve. I can't stay long today, she said. But I'll come back. Daniel hesitated. You don't have to. I said I would, Renee cut in. Then softer, and I mean it. As she reached the front door, something made her stop. Daniel, she said. Yes. If someone came looking for you, she asked, someone outside your family, would they even know where to start? Another long pause. There is one person, Daniel said. But he stopped trusting me years ago. Renee's hand tightened on the doorknob. What's his name? Daniel hesitated. Just long enough to matter. And when he finally answered, Renee understood this wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about who else might already be circling the house on Wexford Drive. Renee drove away with Daniel's unfinished sentence echoing in her head. She replayed it at every stoplight, every turn. The hesitation before he'd spoken. The weight behind it. Whoever this person was, they weren't just a contact. They were a risk. Someone Daniel didn't name lightly. At home, she moved through the evening on instinct. Dinner. Dishes. Jordan talking about a group project she half heard. She smiled when she was supposed to, laughed at the right moments, but her mind stayed miles away, trapped in a concrete room beneath a quiet house. That night, after Jordan went to bed, Renee sat at the kitchen table with her phone face down in front of her. She didn't touch it for a long time. Calling the police felt impossible. Too big. Too final. And Eleanor's threat still rang in her ears, sharp and personal. Finally, she turned the phone over and opened the browser. She searched Daniel Whitcomb again. Not the headlines this time. She scrolled past the polished articles, the glowing profiles. She dug deeper. Page after page. Court filings. Business registries. Forums where people spoke more freely, hiding behind usernames. Patterns began to form. Projects that started with promises and ended in silence. Settlements that came with non-disclosure agreements. Entire neighborhoods displaced and then erased from the conversation. Renee leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. Daniel hadn't lied to her. Not about that. But he also hadn't told her everything. The next week passed slowly. Too slowly. Renee jumped at every unfamiliar sound. She checked her rearview mirror more often than necessary. She told herself Eleanor wouldn't act unless she had a reason. But fear didn't listen to logic. When Tuesday came, Renee almost didn't go back. She stood in her hallway, staring at her coat, feeling the familiar pull of caution. But another feeling rose to meet it. Quieter. Steadier. Responsibility. At Wexford Drive, the gate opened on the first buzz. The driveway looked untouched. No signs of disruption. No police tape. Nothing that suggested anything was wrong. Inside, the house felt colder than before. Eleanor wasn't home. Renee worked methodically. Upstairs first. She avoided the photographs this time, focusing on corners and edges, on things she could control. Still, her eyes drifted to small details she hadn't noticed before. A locked drawer in the study. A safe partially hidden behind a painting. Downstairs, she paused in the kitchen, listening. No tapping. No voice. Her heart sank. She dropped to her knees and pressed close to the door. "Daniel?" she whispered. "Nothing." "Daniel?" she said again, louder now. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Just as panic began to bloom, a faint sound came through the door. A shuffle. A breath. "I'm here," Daniel said. His voice sounded weaker than before. Thinner. Renee let out a shaky breath. "You scared me." "I'm sorry," he replied. "I was sleeping. Or trying to." "Are you okay?" she asked. Another pause. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I feel slower." Renee swallowed. She slid a bottle of water under the door, followed by food. He took longer to retrieve it this time. "Did you think about what I said?" Daniel asked. "Yes," Renee said. "And I think we need help." He didn't respond right away. "There's a man," Daniel said finally. "A private investigator. Used to work financial crimes. He looked into me years ago." Renee's pulse quickened. "Is he trustworthy?" Daniel exhaled. "He's stubborn. And he hates loose ends." "Does he know you're alive?" Renee asked. "No," Daniel said. "If he did, he'd already be here." That both comforted and terrified her. "Why him?" Renee asked. "Because he doesn't belong to my world," Daniel said. "And he doesn't owe my mother anything." Renee thought of Eleanor's calm voice. Her confidence. The envelope on the counter. "Will contacting him make things worse?" Renee asked. "Yes," Daniel said without hesitation. "But staying like this will end the same way." Renee closed her eyes. She pictured the scratches on the door. The cough. The way Daniel's voice faded at the edges. "Give me his name," she said. Daniel hesitated again. That same pause. But this time he spoke. As he did, a sound echoed faintly above them. The front door. Opening. Renee's breath caught. "Someone's here," she whispered. Daniel's voice dropped. "You need to go. Now." Footsteps moved across the floor above them. Unhurried. Familiar. Eleanor's voice carried faintly from the hallway. "Come." Controlled. Renee scrambled to her feet, heart racing. She shoved her supplies into her bag, her hands shaking. "Don't come back for a while," Daniel said urgently. "If she senses anything." "I know," Renee whispered. As she reached the kitchen doorway, Eleanor appeared. She smiled, warm and practiced. "You're still here." Renee forced herself to return the smile. "Yes," she said. "Just finishing up." Eleanor's gaze flicked briefly toward the basement door. And for the first time there was something new in her eyes. Suspicion. Renee finished the rest of the house with Eleanor watching. Not directly. Eleanor never hovered. She sat in the living room with a cup of tea, flipping pages of a magazine she clearly wasn't reading. But Renee felt her attention everywhere. In the way footsteps paused when Renee moved rooms. In the way silence stretched just a little too long. Every motion felt amplified. The swish of the mop. The snap of rubber gloves. The zipper on her bag sounded unnaturally loud. When she finally stepped outside, the cold air rushed into her lungs like relief. She didn't look back. Not until she was halfway down the driveway. Eleanor stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, watching Renee leave as if memorizing the shape of her retreat. Renee drove home with both hands locked on the steering wheel. She didn't turn on the radio. Didn't check her phone. She watched every car that followed her for more than 2 turns. Every unfamiliar vehicle parked on her street made her stomach tighten. At home, Jordan was sprawled on the floor, building something out of mismatched pieces. He looked up and grinned. "You're early again," he said. "Yeah," Renee replied, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Slow day." He nodded and went back to his project. Just like that. No suspicion. No questions. The normalcy hit her harder than fear had. That night, Renee didn't sleep at all. She lay awake listening to the house settle, every creak and hum magnified. Eleanor's voice replayed in her head. "Come." Confident. Certain. Suspicion changes people. Renee knew that. Once planted, it didn't fade. It sharpened. By morning, she'd made a decision she wasn't fully ready to face. She called in sick to her other jobs. Told Jordan she had errands to run while he was at school. Then she sat in her car outside a coffee shop she didn't usually visit, phone heavy in her hand. Daniel's words echoed back to her. A private investigator. Stubborn. Hates loose ends. She searched the name he'd given her. The results weren't flashy. No polished website. No smiling headshots. Just a sparse page listing services and an old office address 2 towns over. Financial investigations. Asset tracing. Background checks. Renee stared at the number for a long time. Then she dialed. It rang 4 times before a man answered. His voice was rough, like he didn't waste much time on pleasantries. Greer. My name is Renee Walker, she said, her voice catching slightly. I think you once investigated someone named Daniel Whitcomb. There was a pause. Not confusion. Recognition. Who's asking? The man said. I clean a house, Renee replied. On Wexford Drive. Silence stretched. Longer this time. That address isn't on any of my old files, Greer said slowly. Why are you calling me? Renee swallowed. Because he's not dead. Another pause. This one heavier. You shouldn't be saying that over the phone, Greer said. I know, Renee replied. But I don't know what else to do. Greer exhaled sharply. Listen carefully, he said. If what you're implying is true, you're already involved in something dangerous. I figured that out, Renee said. Good, he replied. Because it means you might actually listen. They agreed to meet. Not at his office. Not anywhere predictable. A diner off the highway halfway between their neighborhoods. Renee hung up and sat there, heart pounding. She'd crossed another line. One she couldn't step back over. That afternoon she went about her errands with a strange calm. The kind that comes when fear has already done its worst. When the only thing left is movement. At the diner, Greer slid into the booth across from her without introducing himself. He looked tired. Rumpled. Like a man who'd learned the hard way that truth didn't come clean. Start from the beginning, he said. Renee told him enough. Not everything. She described the house. The basement. The voice. The locks. She didn't mention the food. Or the threats. Greer listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened as she spoke. When was the last time you saw him? He asked. Today, Renee said. Greer leaned back slowly. That's a problem. Why? She asked. Because Daniel Whitcomb disappearing quietly only works if he stays quiet, Greer said. If someone's keeping him alive, it's not mercy. It's leverage. Renee's stomach dropped. Leverage for what? Greer's eyes met hers. For everything he knows. Renee thought of Eleanor. Her calm certainty. Her belief that money could erase sound. I think she suspects me, Renee said quietly. Greer nodded. Then we don't have much time. As Renee stood to leave, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from an unknown number. Just 4 words. You forgot something today. Renee felt the blood drain from her face. Because she knew exactly who had sent it. And she knew what Eleanor was reminding her of. Renee didn't reply to the message. She stared at the screen until it dimmed, then slipped the phone face down onto the passenger seat like it might burn her. Greer watched her closely, his eyes tracking every shift in her expression. She knows, he said. She suspects, Renee corrected, though her voice lacked conviction. If she knew, she wouldn't be sending messages. She'd fire me. Or worse. Greer didn't argue. He slid a few bills onto the table and stood. You're going to keep going to that house like nothing's wrong, he said. No sudden changes. No hero moves. I can't just pretend, Renee said, following him out into the gray afternoon. There's a man locked in her basement. And if you rush this, Greer replied, there could be a dead man in that basement. They stood beside their cars. Wind rattled a loose sign near the diner entrance. I'll start digging quietly, Greer said. Property records. Shell companies. Anyone connected to her finances. But it takes time. How much? Renee asked. More than she's giving you, he said. Renee drove away with a weight pressing down on her chest. Every red light felt like a delay she couldn't afford. Every pedestrian crossing the street made her flinch. That night, Eleanor didn't text again. The silence was worse. The next morning, Renee almost didn't go. She stood in her kitchen, keys in hand, staring at the door like it might slam shut on its own. Jordan was at the table eating cereal, humming to himself. The normalcy grounded her. "You good?" he asked, mouth full. "Yeah," Renee said. "Just tired." He nodded, already drifting back into his own world. Renee kissed the top of his head and left before she could change her mind. The Whitcomb house looked the same. Immaculate. So, a place that pretended nothing ever went wrong inside it. Eleanor answered the door herself. "Good morning, Renee," she said warmly. Too warmly. "Morning," Renee replied, forcing a smile. Eleanor stepped aside and let her in. "I hope you didn't mind the message yesterday. I noticed the pantry shelf wasn't dusted." Renee's pulse thudded in her ears. "Of course not," she said. "That's on me." Eleanor studied her for a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned and walked away. The house felt smaller than usual. Tighter. Like the walls were listening. Renee cleaned carefully, methodically. She avoided the basement door at first, focusing on upstairs rooms, the guest bathroom, the sunroom Eleanor never used. Every few minutes, Eleanor passed by without speaking, her presence a constant pressure at Renee's back. By late afternoon, there was no avoiding it. Renee stood at the top of the basement stairs, hand on the rail. The door was unlocked. It always was. She descended slowly. The air changed immediately. Cooler. Damp. The hum of the dehumidifier vibrated through her shoes. "Renee?" Daniel's voice came from the shadows. "I'm here," she whispered. She stepped into view. His face looked thinner, paler. His eyes flicked behind her, fear sharpening his features. "She's upstairs," he said quickly. "She came down earlier. Asked questions." "What kind of questions?" Renee asked. "About you," he replied. "About what you notice. What you talk about." Renee swallowed. "What did you say?" "That you're quiet," Daniel said. "That you don't ask things you don't need to know." Renee felt sick. "You shouldn't have said anything." "I didn't have a choice," he said. "She already thinks you know." A sound echoed from above. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Daniel's breathing quickened. "You need to leave," he whispered. "Now." Renee turned toward the stairs. Eleanor stood at the top, hands folded, watching them both. "I wondered how long it would take," Eleanor said calmly. Renee froze. Her mind raced through excuses, lies, half-truths. None of them felt big enough. "Took for what?" Renee asked. "For you to stop pretending you don't see him," Eleanor said, her gaze steady. "Come up here, Renee. Let's talk." Daniel shook his head violently. "Don't," he mouthed. Renee took one step back instead. Eleanor's smile faded. "That would be a mistake," she said softly. "And I don't think you're the kind of person who makes those." Renee felt the weight of the house pressing in, the truth finally out in the open. And she realized, with chilling clarity, that this conversation was never going to end the way she hoped. Renee climbed the stairs slowly, every step feeling like a decision she couldn't undo. Eleanor waited at the top, her posture relaxed, her expression almost patient. She didn't reach for Renee. Didn't block the stairway. That made it worse. Control without force. Daniel's presence faded behind her as the basement door closed with a soft, final click. Eleanor gestured toward the kitchen. "Let's sit," she said. "Standing makes people defensive." Renee followed. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something warm from the oven. Bread maybe. The ordinary details felt surreal. Eleanor poured tea into 2 cups. Her hands were steady. Not a single tremor. "You're frightened?" Eleanor said, sliding 1 cup across the counter. "That's understandable." Renee didn't touch it. "You locked a man in your basement." Eleanor exhaled as if Renee had misunderstood a minor detail. "I kept him safe." "By chaining him to a wall?" Renee shot back. Eleanor's eyes hardened for a moment. Then the softness returned. Daniel is not a simple man, she said. He makes dangerous choices. So you decided to imprison him? I decided to contain a problem, Eleanor replied. One that the world refused to see. Renee's heart pounded. People think he's dead. Yes, Eleanor said. That was necessary. The words hung between them, heavy and unreal. You killed him, Renee said quietly. No, Eleanor replied. I saved him from himself. Renee let out a shaky laugh. That's not how saving works. Eleanor studied her. You grew up taking care of people, didn't you? Renee stiffened. What does that have to do with anything? It explains your loyalty, Eleanor said. Your silence. Why you didn't run the first day you heard him. Renee felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the basement. You didn't call the police, Eleanor continued. You didn't tell your friends. You kept coming back. That tells me you're not reckless. You're careful. Renee's voice dropped. I was scared. So was I, Eleanor said. When I learned what Daniel had done. Renee frowned. Done what? Eleanor paused. Just long enough to make the question echo. He ruined people, Eleanor said. Quietly. Legally. With signatures and numbers. Retirement funds. Charities. Small hospitals. He moved money like it was air. Renee thought of Greer's words. Leverage. You're talking about financial crimes, Renee said. That doesn't justify this. It does when the system protects men like him, Eleanor replied. He was investigated. Question. Clear. Again and again. Renee's stomach twisted. So you took the law into your own hands. I removed his ability to harm, Eleanor said. And replaced it with your own, Renee said. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. Careful. Silence stretched. The house creaked softly around them. What happens to me? Renee asked finally. Eleanor smiled. Not kindly. Not cruelly. Assessing. That depends, she said. On whether you can be trusted. Renee's pulse thudded in her ears. Trusted to do what? To continue as you have been, Eleanor replied. To clean. To listen. To stay quiet. Renee shook her head. I can't. You already have, Eleanor said calmly. Renee stood abruptly. I'm leaving. Eleanor didn't stop her. She simply said, if you walk out that door, Renee, someone will start asking questions. Renee froze. About your son, Eleanor added. About your finances. About the little inconsistencies that come from working 3 jobs. Renee turned slowly. You looked into me. Of course, Eleanor said. I don't invite strangers into my home. Fear slid into something colder. Anger. You're threatening me, Renee said. I'm protecting my life, Eleanor replied. Just as you protect yours. Renee's phone vibrated in her pocket. She didn't have to look to know who it was. Eleanor's eyes flicked toward the sound, then back to Renee's face. Someone is helping you, Eleanor said softly. Renee said nothing. Eleanor's smile vanished. That, she said, changes things. Upstairs, somewhere near the front of the house, a door opened, and footsteps that did not belong to either of them began to move through the hallway. The footsteps were unhurried, confident. They crossed the living room, paused, then resumed toward the kitchen. Eleanor didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She simply watched Renee with a look that held both irritation and calculation. Did you invite someone? Eleanor asked. Renee's mouth was dry. No. The footsteps stopped just outside the kitchen doorway. A man's voice followed. Mrs. Whitcomb? Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned slightly, just enough to face the doorway without taking her eyes off Renee. Yes, she replied. The man stepped into view. Late 40s. Plain jacket. No uniform. He held himself carefully, like someone used to not being noticed. My name is Calvin Moore, he said. County Assessor's Office. We scheduled a brief property review. Renee's heart lurched. That wasn't what she'd expected. Eleanor hadn't either. I don't recall scheduling anything, Eleanor said smoothly. Calvin offered a polite smile. It was arranged through your legal representative. Routine follow-up. Shouldn't take long. Eleanor glanced at Renee. Just once. A warning disguised as curiosity. Very well, Eleanor said. If you'll excuse us. She rose and moved toward Calvin, placing herself neatly between him and the rest of the house. Renee, she added, why don't you finish the guest bathroom? Renee understood the order beneath the politeness. Of course, she said, forcing calm into her voice. She walked away on legs that felt borrowed. In the hallway, Renee leaned briefly against the wall, breathing through the panic. Greer hadn't mentioned this, which meant it wasn't official. Or it was official and disguised well. She worked slowly, ears straining for sound. Voices drifted faintly from the kitchen. Come. Civil. No raised tones. After several minutes, footsteps moved again. Toward the living room. Then the front door opened and closed. Silence returned. Renee waited. When Eleanor finally appeared in the hallway, her expression had shifted. Still composed, but sharper around the edges. That was inconvenient, Eleanor said. Renee kept her eyes down. I'm sorry. That wasn't your doing, Eleanor replied. But it tells me something. Renee's pulse quickened. What's that? That someone has begun to circle, Eleanor said. And circles always tighten. Eleanor walked past her, stopping near the basement door. She rested a hand on it casually, possessively. Daniel has been restless, she said. That usually happens when hope appears. Renee's throat tightened. What are you saying? I'm saying, Eleanor replied, that hope needs consequences. Renee's breath caught. Don't hurt him. Eleanor turned, genuinely surprised. Hurt him, she said. I would never. Relief flashed briefly. Then Eleanor continued. But I will remind him of reality. She opened the basement door. Renee followed without thinking. The basement felt colder than before. Darker. Daniel looked up as they descended. His eyes flicked from Eleanor to Renee, searching her face. Eleanor stopped several feet away from him. Daniel, she said calmly, we had a visitor today. Daniel stiffened. Who? Someone curious, Eleanor replied. Someone who might be convinced to dig. Daniel's gaze snapped to Renee. You told someone. I didn't tell everything, Renee said quickly. That's how it starts, Eleanor said. Fragments. It's curiosity. Daniel pulled against his restraints, anger flashing through his fear. You promised, he said. You said this would end. And it will, Eleanor replied. When it's safe. She turned to Renee. You see, she said, this is why discretion matters. Eleanor stepped closer to Daniel, lowering her voice. If people begin asking questions, Daniel, they won't ask kindly. They'll tear apart what little reputation you have left. Daniel swallowed hard. What do you want? Eleanor straightened. I want quiet. She turned back to Renee. And I want loyalty. Renee felt trapped between them. Between fear and guilt and something that felt like responsibility. What happens if I don't give you that? Renee asked. Eleanor smiled faintly. Then things become complicated. She reached into her pocket and pulled out Renee's phone. Renee's blood ran cold. You left this upstairs last week, Eleanor said. Unlocked. She tapped the screen once. Photos. Messages. Notes Renee hadn't realized were visible. I know about Mr. Greer, Eleanor said softly. I know where your son goes to school. I know your schedule better than you do. Daniel stared at Renee, horror etched across his face. Eleanor slipped the phone back into her pocket. We are all connected now, she said. Whether we like it or not. She turned and started up the stairs. At the top she paused. You may finish your work for today, Renee, Eleanor said. Tomorrow we'll discuss your future. The basement door closed. Renee stood frozen beside Daniel, the weight of Eleanor's words settling in. Because tomorrow meant decisions. And decisions, she knew, came with consequences neither of them could outrun. Renee sat on the edge of the basement step, her hands gripping her knees, trying to steady her racing thoughts. Daniel leaned back against the cold concrete wall, his eyes fixed on the shadows cast by the single overhead bulb. The silence stretched, thick and oppressive, like the air itself was holding its breath. "You okay?" Renee asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel shook his head slowly. I don't know anymore. Every time she leaves, it feels like the walls shrink." Renee swallowed. "I know." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as though he was measuring whether she'd break under the weight of knowing too much. "Why do you keep coming back?" he asked. Renee hesitated. How could she explain? It wasn't bravery. It wasn't heroism. It was a stubborn refusal to ignore someone trapped and helpless. "Because someone has to see you," she said finally. "Because if I don't, who will?" Daniel let out a humorless laugh. "You're not supposed to care." "I care," she said simply. "I can't help it." He nodded, a faint shadow of a smile tugging at his lips. Then the room grew quiet again, the kind of quiet that makes every breath feel loud. Renee moved to the corner and pulled her bag closer, checking that the water bottle and the small snacks were still there. She hesitated before speaking again. "We need a plan," she said. "I can't just keep sneaking you food and water. She'll notice eventually." Daniel's face darkened. "There is no plan. There is only containment. That's how it's always been. That's how it has to stay." "No," Renee said, shaking her head. "I don't accept that. There has to be a way out." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "You don't understand. She's careful. Too careful. Every person she brings near this house is calculated. She doesn't make mistakes." Renee's fingers tightened around her bag strap. "Then we make her make a mistake." Daniel's laugh was bitter this time. "You think you can outsmart her? You think your 3 jobs and grocery runs give you an advantage? She knows people like you. She knows your habits before you even notice them yourself." Renee's heart sank. But she couldn't stop. "Then we find someone who's better than me. Someone she can't predict." Daniel's eyes flickered with curiosity. "You mean a professional?" Renee nodded. "Someone who doesn't care about your money, your name, or her reputation. Someone who only wants the truth." Daniel's face fell. "Even if that truth comes with consequences we can't control?" Renee's voice grew firmer. "Especially then." They sat in silence for a long time. The hum of the dehumidifier filled the basement, punctuated by the occasional drip of water from a nearby pipe. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice low, cautious. "There's one person. Someone who once tried to help me escape before she had me fully contained. He gave up because he thought it was impossible. Maybe he's still out there. Maybe he's changed his mind." Renee leaned forward, intrigued. "Who?" Daniel hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I can't say his name. Not yet. But he's stubborn. Like you. Maybe too stubborn for his own good." Renee swallowed hard. She felt a spark of hope flare inside her chest. The kind that felt dangerous because it came with risk. "We need him," she said softly. "And we need to move fast. Eleanor's patience isn't infinite." Daniel nodded slowly, his expression a mixture of fear and relief. "You don't know what you're asking. He's dangerous. Not in the way you think. But in the way that changes everything." Renee's pulse quickened. "Then we take the risk. We have no choice." A sudden sound echoed from upstairs, metallic, deliberate. Footsteps. Slow. Calculated. "Eleanor." Daniel's eyes widened. "She's coming down." Renee grabbed her bag, her hands trembling. "Get ready. Whatever happens, we stick together." The basement door creaked. Eleanor's shadow stretched across the threshold, and Renee realized, with a pit forming in her stomach, that nothing in the house was ordinary anymore. And this time, the next move would set everything in motion, one way or another. Eleanor descended the stairs slowly, one hand resting on the rail, her steps measured like she was counting them. The overhead light flickered as she reached the bottom, throwing her face in and out of shadow. Renee stood instinctively, placing herself half a step in front of Daniel. It wasn't brave. It was reflex. Eleanor noticed. "That's interesting," she said mildly. "You've grown protective." Renee forced herself to meet her gaze. "He's a person." Eleanor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. So are we, she replied. Yet we all accept limits. She stopped a few feet away, close enough that Renee could smell her perfume. Clean, subtle, expensive. I was thinking about tomorrow, Eleanor continued. About what comes next. Daniel shifted behind Renee. The chain scraped softly against the wall. I've decided, Eleanor said, that transparency might help. Renee's heart skipped. Transparency? Yes, Eleanor said. You see, secrets rot when they're kept too long. They make people careless. She turned her attention to Daniel. Tell her. Daniel stiffened. Tell her what? Why you're here, Eleanor said. The whole truth. Not the version that makes you sympathetic. Renee glanced back at him. Daniel? His jaw tightened. For a moment, Renee thought he wouldn't speak. Then he exhaled slowly. I didn't just move money, he said. I engineered collapses. Renee frowned. What does that mean? Daniel looked at the floor. I found vulnerable systems. Hospitals on the edge. Pension funds already bleeding. I accelerated the failure. Quietly. Legally. Renee's chest tightened. People lost everything. Yes, he said. And I made a fortune doing it. Eleanor folded her arms. You see why I couldn't let him walk free. Renee shook her head. That still doesn't give you the right. No. Eleanor interrupted. Because the law says so? Her voice sharpened. The law protected him. Paid him. Invited him to fundraisers. She stepped closer to Renee. How many lives does someone get to ruin before containment becomes mercy? Renee's voice trembled, but she didn't back down. You're not stopping harm. You're hiding it. Eleanor studied her, something like disappointment crossing her face. You still think this is simple. I think you're scared, Renee said quietly. That landed. Eleanor's expression tightened just for a second. Then it smoothed again. Fear keeps people alive, she said. You should know that. She turned toward the stairs. I won't be coming down again tonight. Renee's pulse spiked. What does that mean? It means, Eleanor said without turning, that tomorrow you'll decide whether you remain part of this house or become a liability. The word echoed. Liability. She climbed the stairs and shut the door behind her. The lock slid into place with a dull, final sound. Silence rushed in. Renee let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her knees felt weak. Daniel spoke first. She's pushing you. I know, Renee said. She wants you to choose her, he said. Or force her hand. Renee paced the small space, her mind racing. She thinks control is the same as justice. Daniel laughed softly. She's always thought that. Renee stopped. Always. He looked up. You don't know how long this has been going on. Her stomach dropped. How long? Years, Daniel said. Before the basement. Before the house. Renee stared at him. You mean, she's done this before? Yes, he said. Different ways. Different people. Same belief. Renee felt cold all over. That changes everything. It should, Daniel said. Because it means she won't stop. Renee leaned against the wall, breathing hard. She thought of Jordan. Of Eleanor knowing his school. His routine. She thinks she owns the future, Renee said. Daniel nodded. She thinks fear is sustainable. Renee looked at him. You mentioned someone earlier. The person who tried to help you. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. If we involve him, there's no going back. We're already past that, Renee said. He studied her face. You're serious. I don't have the luxury of waiting, Renee replied. Neither do you. Daniel swallowed. Then you need to be careful. I am careful, she said. That's why I'm still alive. A faint sound drifted from upstairs. A door opening. A drawer sliding shut. Renee stiffened. Eleanor was still moving. Still planning. And Renee understood something then with terrifying clarity. Tomorrow wasn't about loyalty. It was about survival. Renee barely slept. She lay on her couch fully dressed, the lamp in the corner left on, her phone face up on her chest like a shield. Every time a car passed outside, she held her breath. Every time the house creaked, she imagined Eleanor's voice slipping through the walls. By morning, exhaustion had settled into her bones, heavy and dull. Jordan noticed immediately. "You sick?" he asked, standing in the doorway with his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Just didn't sleep much," Renee said. She tried to smile. Came out crooked. "You always say that when you're worried," he said. Renee paused. Kids noticed more than adults like to admit. "I'm okay," she said gently. "Promise?" Jordan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You should eat something." After he left for school, Renee sat alone in the quiet and finally checked her phone. No new messages. That scared her more than any threat. She drove to the Whitcomb house late on purpose, hoping to shorten the day. The driveway looked unchanged. No unfamiliar cars. No movement behind the tall windows. Eleanor answered the door, dressed impeccably as if nothing had happened. "Good morning, Renee," she said. "You look tired." "I didn't sleep well," Renee replied truthfully. Eleanor stepped aside. "That happens when people carry too much." The words followed Renee into the house like a warning. They barely spoke all morning. Eleanor stayed in her study, the door closed. Renee cleaned automatically, her body moving through familiar motions while her mind worked furiously. She waited for the signal. The threat. The test. It came just after noon. Eleanor appeared at the foot of the basement stairs. "Come with me," she said. Renee wiped her hands on a towel and followed. Daniel looked up as they entered. His expression tightened when he saw Eleanor. He didn't speak. Eleanor remained standing. "I've decided to be generous," she said. "For your sake, Renee." Renee's stomach nodded. "Generous how?" "I'm giving you an exit," Eleanor said. "You may leave today and never return." Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" Eleanor continued calmly. "No more cleaning. No more visits. No more involvement." Relief flashed through Renee, then vanished. "There's a condition," Eleanor added. Of course there was. "You will sign a non-disclosure agreement," Eleanor said. "And you will forget this place exists." Renee looked at Daniel. His eyes were wide. "Panicked? And him?" Renee asked. Eleanor followed her gaze. "Daniel stays." Renee's heart pounded. "You're asking me to abandon him." "I'm asking you to save yourself," Eleanor replied. "And your son." The words landed with brutal precision. Daniel's voice was hoarse. "Don't do this," he said. "She'll bury you." Renee turned to Eleanor. "If I say no?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "Then I assume you've chosen differently." The meaning was clear. Renee's thoughts raced. Jordan's face. His school. His laugh. The fragile normalcy she fought to protect every day. Eleanor held out a folder. Inside, a neatly prepared document waited. Type. Official. Ready. "This is your chance," Eleanor said. "Take it." Renee reached out and stopped. She thought of the first time she heard Daniel's voice through the wall. Weak. Afraid. Human. She looked at Eleanor. "If I leave," she said slowly, "nothing changes." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "You don't believe that." "I do," Renee replied. "You'll keep doing this. To someone else. Maybe worse." Eleanor's voice cooled. "That's not your concern." "It is now," Renee said. Silence stretched. The basement felt smaller, the air thicker. Daniel whispered, "Renee, please?" She turned to him. "I can't save you by disappearing." She looked back at Eleanor. "I'm not signing." Eleanor closed the folder with deliberate calm. "Then you've made your choice." Renee's pulse roared in her ears. "So have you." Eleanor stepped back. "I gave you mercy." "No," Renee said quietly. "You offered silence." Eleanor's gaze hardened. "Then understand this," she said. "From this moment on, you are no longer an observer." She turned toward the stairs. "Everything that happens next," Eleanor added without looking back, "happens because you stayed." The door closed above them, the lock sliding into place. Daniel let out a shaky breath. "You just signed your own sentence." Renee felt fear crawl up her spine, but beneath it, something steadier took hold. No, she said softly. I just stopped running. And somewhere upstairs, Eleanor was already making her next move. The house felt different after that. Not louder. Not darker. Just tighter, like every room had leaned in closer to listen. Renee finished her work in silence. Eleanor didn't come back down. No more instructions. No final glance. That absence carried its own message. The decision had been made. Now came the consequences. Renee drove home with her jaw clenched so hard it ached. She checked her mirrors constantly, certain she'd see the familiar shape of Eleanor's car behind her. But the road stayed empty. That didn't calm her. At home, Jordan was already there, sitting on the couch with his shoes kicked off, watching something loud and ridiculous on TV. The sound felt like a gift. You're late, he said without looking away from the screen. Yeah, Renee replied. Long day. She watched him for a moment longer than usual. The way he leaned forward when something amused him. The way he trusted that home was safe. That night, she packed a small bag and hid it under her bed. Just essentials. Documents. A burner phone Greer had insisted she keep still unused. At 1:13 a.m. it buzzed. Unknown number. You should have taken the deal. Renee sat up instantly, her heart slamming against her ribs. She typed a response, deleted it, then set the phone back down without replying. Across the room, Jordan slept on, unaware. The next morning, Greer called before she could. Things are moving, he said without preamble. And not in your favor. Renee closed herself in the bathroom, lowering her voice. What did you find? Enough to confirm Eleanor isn't just wealthy, he replied. She's insulated. Foundations, trusts, layers of legal distance. And she's done this before. Renee's grip tightened on the sink. Other people? Different circumstances, Greer said. Same pattern. Financial predators who embarrassed the wrong people. Disappeared. Quietly. And no one stopped her, Renee said. No one could prove anything, Greer replied. Until now. Renee's pulse quickened. You have proof? I have threats, he said. But threads snap if pulled too hard. What do you need from me? She asked. Greer hesitated. Access. Renee knew what that meant. The house. Yes, he said. And the basement. A chill slid through her. She's watching me. I know, Greer replied. Which is why we move when she least expects it. After the call ended, Renee sat on the edge of the tub, staring at the wall until her reflection blurred. She went back to the Whitcomb house that afternoon like nothing had changed. Eleanor greeted her politely. Almost warmly. I'm glad you came back, Eleanor said. Some people mistake defiance for courage. Renee met her gaze. I didn't want to leave work unfinished. Eleanor smiled. Of course you didn't. The day passed in a careful dance. Eleanor stayed close. Too close. Asking small questions. Observing tiny reactions. Renee answered with practiced neutrality. When Eleanor stepped out to take a call, Renee seized the moment. She moved quickly, quietly, slipping down the basement stairs with her heart in her throat. Daniel looked up, alarm flashing across his face. You shouldn't be here. I know, Renee whispered. Listen to me. She knelt beside him, keeping her back to the stairs. Someone is working on this. Someone who believes you need to be found alive. Daniel swallowed. She'll never let that happen. She doesn't have to, Renee said. Just long enough. Daniel studied her face. You're risking everything. Renee nodded. So are you. Before he could respond, the basement light flicked on brighter. Eleanor's voice drifted down the stairs. Come. Curious. Renee. Renee froze. Footsteps began to descend. Slow. Measured. Daniel's eyes widened. She knows. Renee stood, her pulse roaring in her ears. She had seconds. Maybe less. As Eleanor's shadow stretched across the basement wall, Renee realized there would be no more pretending. Only choices. And whichever one she made next would finally break the house open, or bury them all inside it. Eleanor stopped halfway down the stairs. The light above flickered once, then steadied. Her face was calm, but her eyes moved quickly, taking in the scene. Renee standing too close. Daniel's chains pulled tight. The air heavy with something unspoken. This is becoming a habit, Eleanor said mildly. Renee forced herself not to step back. I was finishing my work. Eleanor's gaze lingered on her hands. Empty. No cleaning supplies. No excuse. Of course, Eleanor said. You're very thorough. She descended the rest of the stairs and stopped a few feet away. Close enough that Renee could feel her presence like pressure on her chest. Daniel, Eleanor said without looking at him, did you say something to her? Daniel lifted his chin. I told her the truth. Eleanor smiled faintly. Which version? The one you don't like, he said. Eleanor's smile vanished. Renee felt the shift immediately. The room seemed to contract. You were given an opportunity, Eleanor said to Renee. A generous one. I didn't ask for it, Renee replied. No, Eleanor said. You earned it. By being predictable. Renee's heart thudded. If you know me so well, then you know I couldn't walk away. That's exactly what concerns me, Eleanor said. She turned and walked to a small cabinet Renee had never noticed before. She opened it and took out a slim black device. Not a phone. Something heavier. Daniel stiffened. What are you doing? Restoring balance, Eleanor said. Renee's breath caught. Put that down. Eleanor glanced at her. You don't give orders here. She pressed a button. The basement filled with a sharp, piercing alarm. Not loud enough to draw attention outside the house. Just enough to shatter nerves. Daniel groaned, squeezing his eyes shut. Stop. This is what happens when systems fail, Eleanor said calmly. Pressure increases. Renee moved without thinking. She stepped between Eleanor and Daniel. Enough. The alarm stopped. Silence rushed in. Eleanor looked at Renee, something like surprise crossing her face. Then something else. Appraisal. You're bolder than I thought, Eleanor said. Or more foolish. Renee's voice shook, but she held her ground. If you hurt him, you lose control. People notice patterns. They ask questions. And who would answer them? Eleanor asked. You. Renee hesitated. That was enough. Eleanor nodded once, satisfied. That's what I thought. She turned toward the stairs. Finish your work, Renee. We'll speak later. As she climbed, she added, almost casually, and don't test me again. The door closed above them. Daniel slumped against the wall, breathing hard. She's escalating. I know, Renee said. She's preparing to end this, Daniel said. One way or another. Renee's phone buzzed in her pocket. This time it wasn't Eleanor. A single message from Greer. I have something. But it puts you directly in her line of fire. Renee typed back with trembling fingers. Do it. Seconds passed. Then, tonight. If you can get me inside the house. Renee stared at the screen. Inside the house meant crossing a line Eleanor had drawn years ago. Daniel watched her face. That look means something's happening. It is, Renee said. And, he asked. And if it works, she said slowly, this ends. And if it doesn't? Renee met his eyes. Then we don't get another chance. Upstairs, a door slammed. Footsteps moved across the floor. Purposeful. Decisive. Eleanor was done waiting. Renee pocketed her phone, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and resolve. Tonight wasn't about survival anymore. It was about exposure. And once the truth came into the light, none of them would be able to hide from it again. The sun was already sinking when Renee returned home. The sky outside her windows glowed orange and bruised purple, the kind of sunset people usually stop to admire. Renee barely noticed it. Her thoughts were locked on one word. Tonight. Jordan was in his room, talking animatedly to someone on his headset, laughing like nothing in the world was wrong. Renee stood in the hallway and listened for a moment longer than necessary. She memorized the sound. Then she knocked. Hey, she said, keeping her voice light. I need you to do me a favor. Jordan pulled one ear cup aside. What's up? You're staying at Mrs. Callahan's tonight, Renee said. Just for one night. He frowned. Why? Work stuff, she replied. Late. Boring. Adult. He studied her face, suspicious. You okay? Renee smiled. This time it was real, even if it hurt. I will be. An hour later, she watched him walk into the neighbor's house with his overnight bag. She waited until the door closed behind him before she let herself breathe again. Back inside, she moved fast. She changed clothes. Dark, quiet fabrics. No jewelry. Shoes she could run in. She checked the burner phone, then her regular one, then turned the latter off completely. At 8:47 p.m., a message came through on the burner. Greer, I'm 2 blocks away. Any changes? Renee typed back. Still clear. She's upstairs. Pause. Greer, once I'm in, there's no improvising. You do exactly what I say. Renee stared at the message. She typed one word. Understood. She drove separately, parking down the street from the Whitcomb house. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Porch lights glowing. Curtains drawn. A dog barking somewhere in the distance. No one would guess what lived beneath that quiet. Renee approached the house on foot, her steps measured, her heart hammering. Eleanor answered the door almost immediately. You're late, Eleanor said. I had to handle something, Renee replied evenly. Eleanor studied her for a beat too long, then stepped aside. We were just about to have a conversation. Renee entered, letting the door close behind her. Inside, the house was dimmer than usual. Only a few lamps were on. The silence felt deliberate. Eleanor gestured toward the living room. Sit. Renee did. Eleanor remained standing. You've been busy, she said. Phones. Meetings. Secrets. Renee kept her expression neutral. I clean houses, Eleanor. That's my life. Eleanor tilted her head. You're not very good at lying. Renee's pulse quickened. Neither are you. That earned a small smile. I admire your persistence, Eleanor said. It's almost a shame. Renee's burner phone vibrated in her pocket. What? Sure. The signal they'd agreed on. Greer was at the side entrance. Renee stood. I need the restroom. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. Now? Yes, Renee said. Now. Pause. Then Eleanor nodded. Go. Renee walked, not too fast, not too slow. Her hands trembled as she reached the hallway. She turned the corner and slipped toward the side door, her breath shallow. She unlocked it. Greer stepped inside without a word. He looked smaller than she expected. Older. But his eyes were sharp, alert, already taking in the layout. You have 3 minutes, he whispered. She has internal cameras. Renee nodded and led him down the basement stairs. Daniel looked up, disbelief flashing across his face when he saw Greer. You came back, Daniel whispered. Greer's jaw tightened. I told you I hated loose ends. He moved quickly, photographing restraints, the room, the locks. He recorded Daniel's statements in short bursts. Precise. Controlled. Enough, Greer said after 2 minutes. We have what we need. A sound came from upstairs. A floorboard creaked. Then another. Renee's heart lurched. She's coming. Greer pocketed his device. We exit now. They reached the stairs just as the basement lights snapped brighter. Eleanor stood at the top. Her eyes went immediately to Greer. Well, she said calmly. So this is the man. Greer didn't flinch. You should have let him go. Eleanor smiled. You should have stayed away. Renee felt the air drain from the room. This house, Eleanor continued, was designed to hold secrets. People like you never understand that until it's too late. She stepped down one stair. Then another. Renee realized with sick clarity that Eleanor hadn't been surprised. She'd been waiting. And whatever came next was something Eleanor believed she could still control. Eleanor stopped 3 steps from the bottom. The distance was deliberate. Close enough to dominate the room. Far enough to remind them who still controlled the exit. You broke into my home, Eleanor said calmly. Again. Greer stood slightly in front of Renee, his posture casual but ready. You broke the law years ago, he replied. You just hid it better. Eleanor's eyes flicked to Daniel, then back to Greer. Did you get what you wanted? Greer didn't answer. Renee felt Eleanor's attention settle on her instead. Heavy. Personal. I gave you mercy, Eleanor said, and you invited a stranger into my basement. Renee's voice came out steadier than she expected. You don't get to decide what mercy is. Eleanor tilted her head. That's disappointing. She reached into her pocket. Daniel shouted, "Don't." But Eleanor didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a phone. With a single tap, the basement lights shut off. Darkness swallowed them. Renee gasped as her world narrowed to sound and breath. Somewhere close, Daniel struggled against his restraints. Greer swore under his breath. You think exposure scares me? Eleanor's voice echoed in the dark. Come. Controlled. I've lived inside scrutiny my entire life. The lights flicked back on. Eleanor stood exactly where she'd been. But you made one mistake, she continued. You assumed I was alone. A door slammed upstairs. Footsteps, heavy, unfamiliar, moved through the house. Renee's blood ran cold. What did you do? She whispered. Eleanor smiled. I ensured balance. Greer's jaw tightened. Private security? Something like that, Eleanor replied. Men who ask fewer questions than the police. Daniel's breathing turned ragged. You said no one else would be involved. And no one else is, Eleanor said smoothly. Not officially. The footsteps reached the basement door. Greer leaned close to Renee. When I say move, you run. Renee nodded, heart hammering. The basement door opened. A man stepped inside. Broad. Expressionless. He scanned the room with professional detachment. Eleanor gestured toward Greer. That's him. The man advanced. Greer moved first. He grabbed a metal stool and hurled it at the light fixture. Glass shattered. Darkness returned. Now! Greer shouted. Renee ran. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She moved. The sound of shouting filled the basement. Someone cursed. Daniel yelled Renee's name. She reached the stairs, taking them two at a time, bursting into the living room just as another man entered through the front door. No! Eleanor shouted. Renee sprinted past him toward the front door, her lungs burning. Behind her, Greer crashed into someone. Furniture tipped. Glass broke. Renee wrenched the door open and ran into the night. Cold air slapped her face. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. Sirens wailed in the distance. Real sirens. She stumbled down the driveway, nearly falling, when headlights flared across the lawn. A police car screeched to a stop. Hands grabbed her shoulders, steadying her. Ma'am, a voice said urgently, are you hurt? Renee collapsed to her knees, breathless, shaking. No, she gasped. But there's a man in the basement. Chained. You have to. The officers were already moving. More cars arrived. Lights flashing. Doors slamming. Renee looked up just in time to see Eleanor emerge onto the porch. She stood tall. Composed. Even now. An officer approached her. She spoke calmly. Confidently. Then Greer appeared in the doorway, his face bruised but determined. He raised his hands and pointed back into the house. Daniel was brought out minutes later on a stretcher. Alive. Renee's chest broke open at the sight of him. As he passed her, his eyes met hers. Thank you, they said. Eleanor was handcuffed on the front lawn. For the first time, her control slipped. Just a fraction. Enough. But as Renee watched the officers read Eleanor her rights, she understood something that sent a chill through her relief. This wasn't over. Because people like Eleanor never believed they were wrong. They only believed they'd been interrupted. And somewhere inside that belief was the promise of one final reckoning still waiting to unfold. The early morning air was sharp, biting at Renee's cheeks as she stood on the curb, watching the last of the police cars pull away. The street was quiet again, but it didn't feel like the same world she'd left when she came here yesterday. Nothing would ever be the same. Daniel sat in the back of an ambulance, covered in a blanket, staring out the window. His expression was unreadable, but Renee could see the weight of years in his eyes. He wasn't smiling. Not yet. But he was alive. That alone was enough. Greer approached, his coat dusted with the remnants of broken glass. You did well, he said quietly. You made the right call. Renee shook her head. I didn't do this alone. She glanced at Daniel. He stayed alive because of you, because of all of us. Greer nodded. Still, you had courage. More than most. Renee forced herself to breathe. It doesn't feel like courage. It feels terrifying. You're not wrong, Greer said. But you faced it anyway. The ambulance doors closed and Renee watched as it drove away. She wanted to follow, but she knew her role wasn't finished yet. Jordan's safety, her own, and the exposure of Eleanor's crimes still demanded attention. Renee, Greer said, breaking the silence. There's one more thing. She looked at him. What? Eleanor's influence goes farther than we realized, he said. Foundations, shell corporations, even people in law enforcement who turned a blind eye. We have to dismantle that network carefully. Step by step. Renee felt a chill. Step by step, sounds like a long road. It is, Greer replied. But the first step is done. Eleanor is contained. Daniel is free. And you? He studied her. You're still standing. Renee let out a long, shaky breath. I am. For now. A light drizzle began to fall, scattering across the pavement in tiny silver dots. Renee lifted her face to the sky, letting it wash over her like a small cleansing. I don't know what comes next, she admitted. But I know this, I can't go back to being invisible. I can't pretend everything is okay again. Greer smiled faintly. Good. Because the world doesn't reward invisibility. It rewards people who act. Renee nodded, feeling the weight of his words sink in. She thought of Jordan, of Daniel, of the life she had fought to protect. She thought of Eleanor, of her control, and how close she'd come to losing everything. And yet, standing there in the cold morning rain, Renee felt something unfamiliar. Not peace, not relief, not closure, but power. The kind that comes from choosing action when fear is screaming at you to run. Daniel's voice came to her mind, quiet but steady. You stopped running. She smiled, a small, tentative smile that carried more determination than she had felt in years. Renee turned, walking toward her car. Every step was measured, deliberate, as if each one reclaimed a piece of her life stolen by fear and silence. She reached her car, paused, and glanced back at the Whitcomb house one last time. The house loomed in the early mist, still elegant, still imposing, still full of secrets, but it no longer had power over her. She slid into the driver's seat. Jordan would be home soon, the sun rising higher every minute, and she had a life to rebuild, choices to make, and a son to protect. And somewhere deep inside, Renee knew this. Eleanor's shadow might linger, but it no longer dictated the light. She started the engine. The tires whispered against the wet asphalt. And for the first time in a long while, Renee felt ready to drive into the future, whatever it held. Because survival wasn't enough anymore. She intended to live. And live on her own terms. The street stretched ahead, wet and shining, full of possibility. And Renee drove forward.